Physical instruments, in almost all cases, produce a much more complicated and organic and interesting sound than their synthesized counterpart. Once you record a physical instrument, you may sample it or record it to tape or whatever, you've fixed it at a certain moment in time, and it's always going to sound the same. With these instruments, there's always a physical variation. There's variations in the systems that produce the sound, in the robotics and the mechanics themselves, and there's variation in the environment that they're heard. I thought it'd be interesting to send the information out of a computer and use that to play physical instruments, and that led to the idea of musical robots. I started LEMUR in 2000. It's about 4 years ago, and it was a reaction to some of the previous work that I'd done in creating new instruments for musical expression. Most of the instruments that I'd done up to that point were instruments that are playable by people, not traditional instruments, things like rubber tubes and gloves, electronic instruments that could be used to play synthesized sound. So around that time I started thinking that it would be interesting to reverse the equation and sort of send the information out of a computer instead of into a computer, send it out of the computer and use that to play physical instruments. So I started calling on a number of people with a very wide range of disciplines. To create these instruments requires electrical engineering skills and computer programming and machining skill. It also requires instrument and sonic design. It requires aesthetic design and sculptural design. Each person that came into the group came in with the same overarching idea of creating automated and robotic instruments, but everyone had a very different idea of what that meant. So the instruments, though we share technology and we influence each other's ideas, the instruments all end up looking very distinct and individual and really reflect the designer's aesthetic.
Sonically, they're very interesting in that they throw sound literally in every direction. There's no real direction to the sound. And so people have a hard time hearing where it's coming from. And people will be looking around and looking around and looking around. It isn't until they actually see the thing moving that they realize, that's where the sound's coming from.
The Modbots. Bill Bowen, who's the designer of those instruments, is really interested in the idea of sonifying architectural spaces. He's also interested in the idea of surround sound, but surround sound in a very true sense, in a much more complicated sense than you get from speakers. Even a surround sound system it's very pointillistic. The sound is, you're very much aware that the sound is coming from speakers. You can almost always walk into a room with your eyes closed and know if you're hearing live sound or you're hearing sound from speakers. They can play algorithmically. They can generate music from an algorithmic software program. So they, in a sense, are playing themselves. They're making up their own music. And they're doing that in a very physical sense. That's certainly something that's been explored before in synthesized music, but not so much in real physical, robotic, and automated instruments.
last summer, Eric Zinger and I knew each other. I was teaching at NYU for a few years. So we knew each other, and last summer he just called me up and said, would you like to write for a robot? So the occasion just presented itself like that. At Harvest Works down in Soho, he was set up, the guitar bot, so I went to see it. And he looked very cold, and it's a very like a sliding, you know, like a rails. And what is that? It's like, I thought robot, like a life-size thing playing the guitar or something, or just a, you know, sliding thing. Then, you know, he did some demo for me, and I think Joshua Fried's piece or something like that. And all of a sudden, it started to take its own life. Like, there's something in there that's moving. And in my mind, I knew that the computer is controlling the slide, you know, the notes and the spinning wheels and stuff like. But when it actually moves, it really is different. So it has its own personality, own, you know, voice to tell a story or something. And what I'm really interested is that it affects me. You know, it affects me emotionally, musically, and that's interesting. But when you have something that I'm controlling, yes, I'm controlling, but it starts to affect me, but I know in my head that I'm controlling it, but it affects me, and that's when something new, you know, some new expressions or performance practice, or how you call it, but new form of performing art. That, I think that's what really interests me.
Don't composers want to work with real musicians? Are we taking jobs away from musicians? We get asked that question a lot. And I don't think so at all. I think we're actually creating more opportunities for composers and for musicians. And what I mean by that is we can put these new tools in the hands of composers, and they are exciting. I mean, the composers that we've worked with have all been very excited by the opportunity of working with automated instruments. The instruments themselves can play in ways that humans can't play in some cases. In other cases, they play in a different manner that humans do. So a human might be able to emulate what the instrument is doing, that the robotic instrument is doing. The robotic instrument might be able to emulate what a human is doing, but humans and robots do things in different ways. So the effects are always different. Certain of the sounds and the instruments that get incorporated into the musical robots are ethnic instruments and traditional instruments. TibetBot is a good example of that uses Tibetan singing bowls. And when I look at that instrument, I think Zen robotics. It's integrating a very solemn and sacred instrument with, I guess, what's worshipped in our culture in our time, which is technology.